Today, we are in a situation of major conflicts around the globe. These conflicts must constitute a particular priority for the Secretary General. Engaged, present, probing, listening, seeking opportunities to suggest a way out, all recognizing that in the end the decision will be on the part of the parties in conflict and the major players. I especially have in mind the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, the Great Lakes region of Africa, Sudan, Iran, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel. One of the most disturbing features of the situations I refer to is the fact that innocent civilians, particularly women and children, are disproportionately affected by these conflicts. It is one of the reasons why we cannot stand still. We must do everything within our powers to act. Over the years, we have continued to emphasize the importance of human rights. In the words of the Charter, fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. These are the words of the Charter. And we must return to the basics in terms of the regime of human rights of which I speak, the basics as postulated in the Charter. For a human rights approach to be credible and enjoy broad legitimacy, every effort must be made to guard against politicization, instrumentalization, and the intrusion of ideology in our pursuit of human rights. There should be greater sensitivity to different cultural perspectives and social norms. The UN must better understand and acknowledge the deep traditions and cultures of human dignity, respect, and social cohesion that exist in many societies. This, in part, will be my approach for rebuilding consensus on the issue of human rights back to the basics. For the United Nations to discharge the responsibilities set out in the Charter, let me say this clearly and simply. Reform is no longer an optional choice. It is an imperative. Without it, the institution is at grave risk. We cannot continue to do business as usual. To do so would be a grave mistake and error of judgment. Key to the organization's success is its legitimacy, effectiveness, and efficiency. And therefore, the reform initiative subsumed under UN 80 must not only be continued as a priority of the Secretary General, but be a continuous process that becomes part of the DNA, the outlook, the culture of the organization. Every organization that wishes to be at the cutting edge, vibrant and viable, must consistently bring review and constantly. Madam President, as Secretary General, I would put priority on harnessing the incredible force which is being unleashed by artificial intelligence to make this a force for good for the entire world community with access and benefit for all. I have, over the last 5 years, been based in northern Uganda. And when the calls and messages asking me to consider to be a candidate for this position came, I was in northern Uganda. What was I doing there? Many of you will recall this is a part of the world that was radically destroyed, collapsed, as a result of over 20 years of the LRA war. So I've been engaged with others in the enterprise of rebuilding, of restoring, of resuscitating a terribly broken society. I have some idea what peace building means at the ground level. And I believe that United Nations should make it its business to enunciate policies and standards from New York and Geneva and Vienna, but also follow to see the impact on the ground at the national and community level. And finally, Madam President, what I offer, if I'm given the opportunity to be Secretary General, is broad and very deep experience of working across all the three pillars of the UN. It is a track record of building consensus and offering innovative solutions in times of deadlock and crisis. And I would just, Madam President, please end on this note because this inspires me. It is St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. I would embrace this role with the same passion, commitment that I've shown in every leadership position I've had here. I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegation wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Interventions should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. As before, time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoff. A timer will be projected on screen. To assist speakers to observe their time limit, their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before the time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes for questions from delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes from delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. I will remind candidates, I would remind you, Mr. Otunnu, also to stick to your speaking time limits. I will hand you over a card. You don't have automatic microphone cutoffs, but to have a fair and transparent process for everybody else, I would kindly ask you to stay within the time limit. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Qatar on behalf of the Arab group, followed by the European Union and Nepal.
Thank you, Madam President. We are honored to speak on behalf of the Arab Group, and we thank Mr. Olara Otunnu for presenting his vision and priorities for this position. We reaffirm our availability to work with the candidate to enhance the organization's ability to deal with the current challenges and to further establish sustainable development and the UN Charter principles. We have the following questions. First, with regards to the differences in the implementation of international law between countries, what do you think about the issue of non-selectiveness in order to enhance the credibility of the multilateral system and enhance the reliability of these standards? Second, how will you work on increasing the effectiveness of the efforts of the organization with regards to the question of Palestine in order to implement relevant resolutions and obtain a sustaining peace? Third, we see an increase in conflicts and challenges related to the respect of international law and to the UN Charter. How do you propose that this adherence should be strengthened and to enable UN organizations such as UNRWA from fulfilling their roles? Fourth, as for the liquidity crisis and the regression in development efforts and the issue of rising debt, how will you work on the development pillar and advance the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda and provide help for developing countries? Fifth, what is your opinion on the reform of the Security Council? Which mechanism do you think would be most effective? And what is your opinion also on the expansion of the Security Council and the use of veto? Sixth, what do you see? How do you view the UN 80 initiative and its possibility and effects on the organization? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar on behalf of the Arab group. Just as a reminder for everybody, we have 3 hours. You can also come back to some of the questions if it's not possible in the time limits. Please, Mr. Otunnu, you have the floor.
First, on the reform of the Security Council. Very important project, very historic project. The primary responsibility falls on member states, especially the permanent members and the other members of the organization, to continue working, discussing, and come up with a consensus that is viable. But as Secretary General, I would very much encourage this and underscore the fact that there's some historical imbalance that needs to be corrected, but there should be a consensus that is forged between the permanent members and the rest of the membership. Development continues to be exceedingly important. And indeed, I'm concerned that we don't seem to be on track on current indications for fulfilling the SDGs. Particular emphasis should be put on garnering more resources, on encouraging developing countries to assume more responsibility within their own countries, so that we perform better on the SDGs than we did on the Millennium Development Goals, with which I was very much involved. On the UN Charter and the principles in the UN Charter, these principles are for the entire United Nations and the entire membership. And indeed, they should be applied, they should be invoked, they should be promoted without any selectivity whatsoever. That goes for our promotion of human rights, broadly speaking. It goes for promotion of international law, broadly speaking. We should go back to the basics, I said earlier, but once at the basics, we should not be selective in the application of these values and norms. Thank you. Yes, on Gaza and Palestine, you heard me say that among the conflicts on which I would focus immediately because of the unacceptable level of suffering and tragedy is the Gaza situation. But we should not stop at ending the current phase of the conflict. It's exceedingly important that we begin as a matter of priority to address the root cause of the problem and have a long-term solution to this problem. I say a little bit more in my little vision statement on this matter. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for sharing your vision with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. At this critical juncture, the United Nations needs a Secretary General who can build trust, reduce polarization, and bridge divides. Someone who can mobilize collective action, accelerate UN reforms, and deliver solutions that make a real difference in people's lives on the ground. It also needs a Secretary General that is fully prepared to defend and promote full respect for the UN Charter and international law, and all three pillars equally. We emphasize this last point because the EU's support to the UN reflects precisely that premise. We support all strands of the UN's work equally. On peace and security, we actively advance the implementation of key UN mandates through our security and defense missions around the world. On sustainable development, we provide close to 50% of all ODA and over 1/3 of all voluntary contributions to the UN system, safeguarding the SDGs and battling inequality. And on human rights, we are committed to protecting and defending all human rights, civil and political, economic, social, and cultural, with equal vigor. And we are therefore deeply concerned with recent normative attacks on human rights, including on women's and girls' full enjoyment of human rights and on gender equality, as well as racial, religious, political, and other forms of discrimination and persecution, and also with the fact that, remarkably, only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates. It's a clear imbalance between the three UN pillars. So against this backdrop, I'd like to ask the following question. As Secretary General, how would you plan to protect and increase the funding of the human rights pillar as explicitly mandated in the Pact for the Future? And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. First, as I said earlier, all the three pillars of UN engagement are important. And one of the pillars is obviously human rights, enunciated in the very charter of the organization. At the moment, I know that expenditure on human rights is exceedingly low, so I would explore all other avenues permissible that would make it possible to increase funding for human rights activities. But that must be in the context of what I said in my remarks, that we reform the institution, we go back to the basics on the issues of human rights, and we apply them without any selectivity. That's the basis on which I would act. But I would definitely press member states to provide more resources for the work on human rights. And all the other comments that you made, Excellency, about trust, the importance of the UN Charter and the principles, international law, the importance of being clear with mandates, absolutely I'm in agreement with those.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries, followed by the Republic of Korea and the next or first civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of least developed countries, the countries that are recognized as the most structurally vulnerable and yet the furthest behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The LDC group would like to thank Mr. Otunnu for the presentation and kindly request to share his observations on the following two questions. First, if elected as Secretary General, what will be your strategic approach to mobilize and direct adequate, predictable, and concessional resources to LDCs? And how will you reorient the UN development system so that supporting LDCs to achieve the SDGs becomes a visible system-wide priority at the country level? Second, in the face of ongoing financial constraints, how will you ensure that resources and dedicated support to LDCs, including to the LDC dedicated UN mechanisms, are protected and strengthened rather than reduced? And what specific measures will you put in place to ring-fence this support from across the board cuts? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. There are two sides to this ledger. First is the responsibility of the least developed countries in the first instance, to make sure that their houses are in order, that there is adequate planning, that there is local investment, mobilization of resources, that one is fighting corruption. That then provides the legitimacy, the moral grounds on which the Secretary General can go knock on other doors to mobilize resources to support the efforts at the national level. And the knocking on doors should not only be the multilateral institutions that we know, the international financial institutions, but also there are now increasingly important role being played by the private sector. And the Secretary General will be at your disposal to do everything he or she can to mobilize resources to support your efforts at the national level.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, also on behalf of Austria, Egypt, Ghana, Myanmar, Norway, Peru, Portugal, and Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for joining us today. I have the privilege of delivering these questions on behalf of the 9 member states, which the Norway, Sweden, Myanmar, Australia, Peru, Egypt, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, and Portugal, that have had the honor of having their nationals serve as Secretary Generals of the United Nations. Drawing on our experience and institutional memory, we wish to contribute constructively to the current selection process and stand ready to support both the process itself and the next Secretary General. The responsibilities entrusted to Secretary General under the chapter are profound. While the chapter designated the Secretary General as the chief administrative officer of the organization, it also assigned the office an independent political role in the maintenance of international peace and security. As complex conflict continue to unfold across the globe and calls for reform of the organization grow ever stronger, the United Nations require a Secretary General who can successfully navigate both the political and managerial dimensions of the role, equal parts of diplomat and advocate, civil servant and CEO. As a member state, they have honor of having their nationals serve as Secretaries General. Our questions are, first, the office of the Secretary General frequently require difficult judgments between principle and pragmatism, public advocacy and quiet diplomacy, action and restraint. In your course of your career, have you faced a situation in which you have to make such difficult judgment? What lessons and principles from your experiences would guide you as Secretary General? Second, drawing on the experience of the previous Secretary General, what lessons do you believe remain most relevant for the next Secretary General? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea on behalf of those countries having had a Secretary General. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We must begin with principles, but we don't stop at principles. We must see what can work, what is practical, and probe and forge consensus where possible. So I do not see principles and advocacy as being in conflict. There are a continuum of action. Secondly, Excellency, yes, I have been in some very difficult situations which are very much analogous to what you're referring to. In the Security Council, I referred earlier to the deadlock of 1981. In the General Assembly, we had the crisis of Grenada in 1983. I was the chair of the Credentials Committee and had to find a way to build a consensus and to get out of that deadlock. When I was building the regime for protection of children and women in situations of conflict, same, discussing with Security Council members to incorporate this on the agenda of the Council. So yes, I have been in such situations. I have experience of how you navigate in this difficult situation and come up with an inventive solution based on consensus you have built.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the first civil society organization, Civicus, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Jesselina Rana, representing Civicus. Mr. Otunnu, your vision statement speaks of human rights, financing for development, environmental prosperity, and of connecting the global to the community. Yet, you do not mention civil society, an essential partner in connecting global institutions to local communities. This matters more now than ever. We are witnessing the global deterioration of civic space, anti-rights voices increasingly co-opting human rights language and UN spaces, and states continuing to flout international law and violate human rights with impunity, even as we expect a severely under-resourced human rights pillar of the UN to respond effectively to these challenges. If selected Secretary General, and in the spirits of we the peoples, what principal steps would you take to strengthen the UN's relationship with civil society, ensuring we are not simply consulted, but meaningfully engaged in shaping your leadership priorities in upholding international law? Thank you.
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Madam. I would do two things. First, the Secretary General must do everything to reconnect the people of the world to the United Nations. The United Nations is primarily an association of member states, but the member states and the UN collectivity are acting, in the words of the Charter, in the names of the people. So the Secretary General should promote the ideals of the UN, invite the people of the world to be connected to it, give them hope, give them faith. The UN should not be an ivory tower divorced from the people of the world. Secondly, you heard me say how important it is for us to move from the global to the community, enunciate aspirations and policies and values which are important, but take them down and follow them down to their impact at the national and community level. My own experience, I think I mentioned a little earlier, the last 5 years, have been engaged in the womb of the community, and a very difficult enterprise of rebuilding a society devastated by war and encampment. So yes, not only do I believe in this, I hope the Secretary General will be somebody who is comfortable at all these levels, from the global to the national to the community. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Rule of Law.
Madam President, Excellencies, I have the honor to deliver this question on behalf of over 50 cross-regional members of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law, and would like to thank Mr. Otunnu for his presentation and answers provided so far. Excellencies, in recent years, we have witnessed breaches of even the most fundamental provisions of the UN Charter, including the obligation of all member states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force, as well as mass atrocities committed at large scale in grave breach of international law. All this paired with the failure of the Security Council to take action in response. So the questions of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law to you would be: what concrete, proactive and preventive measures would you personally pursue, if elected as Secretary General, to strengthen the rule of law and prevent breaches by member states of the Charter's principles and of international law? What specific preventive diplomacy initiatives would you launch or strengthen? We look forward to the exchange, and I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Rule of Law. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, thank you very much for your question concerning not just the provisions of the UN Charter, but rule of law across the board. As I said earlier, it's very important when we're talking about norms and standards and principles which have been agreed upon at the United Nations, that we should be even-handed, we should be non-selective. Nowhere is that more important than in the role of the Secretary General, because the Secretary General should be the custodian, the advocate, the voice for these principles and norms we are talking about in a way which is very impartial. And sometimes the Secretary General may say it publicly, other times the Secretary General may take it up quietly behind the scene. On other occasions, the Secretary General might find a way to convene a small group to discuss this. There are various instruments available to the Secretary General to perform his or her role as the chief advocate, the main voice for the norms, the principles, the rules we have agreed upon. And that would be the way I would approach this matter. Very important, very important.